Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Bantu Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, as well as the Martin Delaney Institute of Egyptology. And today is Sunday, October the 4th. And this is a last minute conversation, but one prompted by a previous conversation, which we'll get into later. But today is going to be a presentation. It's going to be on the relationship between Niger-Congo and Ancient Egyptian, a lesson in comparative vocabulary. So this is not an interview today. This will be a lecture. So hold tight and we'll be back in just a moment. Peace and blessings. Once again, you're in for a treat if you're not familiar with the kinds of comparison work that I do. Today is a very special conversation again, because, you know, I have to keep having these conversations, and I will keep having these conversations until this knowledge becomes normalized. And so, you know, time and time again, you have folks wanting to dismiss any kind of correlation between West African or Central African languages and cultures with ancient Egyptian. But of course, all of these individuals are individuals who do not do the work themselves. And so, you know, every now and then we have to pop out and challenge them to produce work on the level in which, you know, we're doing in the African School of Egyptology and Linguistics. So, you know, it's going to be a lecture today, a presentation. So, you know, you may want to take notes. And if you have any questions, I will try my best to answer them in a timely fashion if I see them. I won't be able to see them while I'm presenting on this screen, but hopefully, you know, on my phone, I can get a hold of, or I can see, if I can just get into my account and see where my video is, then we can get it on. But as always, I like to give a shout out to those who have made themselves known in the chat room, who are listening live. Mr. Trade, of course, Chavez, Brother Duarte, Odara, all the way out in Brazil. Thank you for joining live. And I'm doing some last minute checking on this other computer to make sure that, you know, Facebook is working correctly. And so I don't even know how you see. Facebook has changed some things on it, so it just doesn't show up automatically like it used to. You're going to have to refresh, click some buttons to see if it is working correctly. So peace to Brian Beno Smith and Sunjata Mowabu, I should say, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you all for joining. and any of you who are listening live on Facebook. So it seems like everything is chill on those respective platforms. So, without further ado, I will get started. Peace to Phi Light and Tist. And, and the rest of the chat, thank you for joining. So let me turn this off so I can hear respectively. And I will go first. Announcements. If you missed, we had a powerful show with Dr. Antoinette Harrell, who was giving us some insight in regards to, slavery continuing into the 1970s here in the United States, as well as, methods and means for going back and tracing your own lineage. And we're going to invite her back on the show. She has volunteered to try to look up some information on my family live so that you can see the process and how it is done. So I'm gonna wait until I go back to Philly and get some documents so that, it won't be too hard. We can, not reinvent the wheel when it comes to certain information regarding my more immediate ancestry, I should say. And so with that being said, we also interviewed Professor Manu and Pim. That interview is up, but it's for those who are on our Patreon. Dr. Shalima Lema Mukinge out of the Congo and Dr. Hunter Adams. All three of those recent interviews are on Patreon for our Patreon listeners. And so, it pays to be a Patreon member to get access to these, early access to these interviews and videos. And so some very, very, very powerful stuff. And so if you have not done so and, want to support this channel, I would advise everyone to go to patreon.com/asarimhotep and, consider and join one of the tiers because your support helps in the funding in this initial stage for the Chiena Into film that, I will be producing over the next couple of years. And, what this film is going to do is to visualize the kinds of connections that we're even going to be talking about today. So, these types of challenges that we face when we try to reclaim the Nile Valley and ancient Egypt in particular, it comes up against a lot of hostility, but never any real systematic and detailed academic presentations. It's always hearsay and the like. And so this is one of the reasons why I continue to do this work, and I want to make sure that this information is given to the world on all types of platforms, whether it be audio, whether it be video, and of course in print, and even in film version in terms of another type of film, like an action film in the near future. And so I'll let y'all know more about that as time progresses. But with that said, I'll take that off again. You can go to the Patreon page and shout out to some more people who have joined the chat. So peace to Brother Hassan, all the way in Europe, Jagad Davis, and of course, Sister Kabbalah Mine, all the way out there in Cali on the West Coast. So thank you all for joining. And so, I will start to share my screen. We'll do it like this. We'll share the entire screen. And I'll make sure that all of that. So I will wait a second to make sure that it shows up on the other platforms. And it looks like it is. So we can get down. And why isn't my live showing up on my phone? Give me about 30 seconds. Let me see if I can, raise. Let me see. asarimhotep. Give me a second, everybody. Wake up, everybody. Peace to Sister Mika. Thank you for joining the program. And okay, here we go. So I got confirmation on all my devices, and we are good to go. So I should say from the outset that this particular lecture is going to assume that you know what certain concepts are. And so, for example, when I say Niger-Congo, I'm not going to go and give a detailed history of Niger-Congo and how it was formed. All you need to know is that Niger-Congo is a label for a language phylum created by Joseph Greenberg in terms of publications in 1963. And allegedly, it is a grouping of languages from West and Central Africa. And, the details beyond that is an entire lecture unto itself. So the languages like Wolof and the Twi language in Ghana and the Yoruba in Nigeria and, Benin and Togo, as well as the Kikongo languages and Zulu, et cetera, allegedly belong to this group. And so, and we'll get into the quote a little later, but when there's always this great opposition when we are comparing the ancient Egyptian language to languages that allegedly belong to the Niger-Congo group, because it is believed that the ancient Egyptian belongs to another language phylum by the name of Afro-Asiatic. And because allegedly these two languages or language groups are not related, then, there's no justification for comparing ancient Egyptian to, say, the Wolof language. And, this has been a source of contention for a number of years. And it is unjustified. And this is just another lecture. So some of this stuff is I have repeated, on occasion in other lectures. So for some of you, this may be kind of a refresher. And so for some of you, this may be new. So with that said, I will continue. And so, again, some of this stuff, maybe all of this stuff, you will find definitely in Alluja Volume 2, which is a book that I released in January of this year. And Alluja Volume 2, Chiena Into Religion and Philosophy. As a matter of fact, this is the foundation of the movie that I'm trying to get done. So when I mentioned earlier the Chiena Into movie, Chiena Into, or the Into family, is explained in this text. And there was a follow-up text towards a comparative dictionary of Chicam and modern African languages. So you can get some of these comparisons as well as some more that were not in Alluja Volume 2 in this text here. And so both of them are available on my website at asarimhotep.com. And so, and also if you want to, donate to the channel or towards the film, you can go through CashApp, and this is the address here, asarimhotep, or you can go directly to asarimhotep.com, and on the homepage, you can make a donation as well. So with that said, and I hope the good brother who shared this with me is not upset for me sharing this with you all. But this is the comment that sparked today's conversation. So a good friend and colleague shared with me a correspondence that he had with somebody. He didn't tell me their name. So this person is anonymous to me. But he shared it with me and, wanted to get my response to the statements which you have before you. So this is the entire commentary that was sent to me. So I'm sharing it with you so I can give you some foundation and context so you understand where I'm coming from, on today. And so this is the anonymous, quotation, but it's something that I come across on the regular. So, this is something that I respond to all the time. So I'm assuming that the person, the colleague of mine, was probably sharing some information in regards to the relationship between ancient Egyptian and West African languages. And whoever this person is, probably responded, to that. I don't know the entire context in which, prompted the individual to make this commentary, but this is just what I imagine. And of course, this is what usually happens in the context in which, I come across this. So, but, without further ado. So the person says, Niger-Congo is a completely separate family of languages, and Egyptian is Afroasiatic, and there are major grammatical differences in case, gender, and number. Bantu languages, for example, lack grammatical gender. You have the masculine, feminine forms of many words in ancient Egyptian. While ancient Egyptian is not a Semitic language, it does share some features of grammar in common with ancient Phoenician, Hebrew, and Arabic. Coptic is the final stage of Egyptian that we know of and is technically a dead language, but I've studied some Bohairic and Sahidic myself, so I know what I'm talking about. But even if we just compared vocabulary, Niger-Congo vocabulary is vastly different from ancient Egyptian vocabulary, and I have a hieroglyphic lexicon to prove that. And so I've highlighted two areas here because they are, of major importance. And so he says that Niger-Congo is a completely separate family of languages, and Egyptian is Afroasiatic. So as I stated from the beginning, the logic of this person and many other people is that these are two separate families, and of course they should not be compared. And so, which of course prompts the other statement that's in the red at the bottom. It says Niger-Congo vocabulary is vastly different from ancient Egyptian vocabulary. And in part of my response to my good brother and colleague, one of the things I mentioned is that I can guarantee you that this individual has yet to do any kind of comparisons between any ancient Egyptian or any of these so-called Niger-Congo languages. And if they do, it is probably because they were looking for lookalikes. And so, those of us on the Amara squad, we like to highlight anytime somebody tries to use lookership to make solid and valid arguments that require a systematic and scientific analysis. And so, one of the reasons why science is so successful, because it doesn't assume that what you see is what you get. We understand that the world is not necessarily how it is presented to us, that something else is going on in terms of the mechanics and the deeper characteristics of the phenomenon that we observe in the universe. And so we can't take for granted that because something looks some way, that is essentially how it is. And so, people who make statements like this, that Niger-Congo vocabulary is vastly different from ancient Egyptian vocabulary, is someone who you can tell does a lot of the lookership that that I'm speaking about, saying here today. So I will continue on. And so, one of the key problems, oh, and I should say, well, I'll go back to that. One of the key problems with the statement is that Niger-Congo or Afroasiatic, they are not language families, but a language phylum. And, saying a so-called supergroup of families. And, even the discussion about this would take a whole lecture unto itself. And actually, I've done a whole lecture on why this is problematic in a previous conversation on this website, on my YouTube channel. And so I will make sure that I tag that video, at the end of this one so that y'all can get context. And also we can look at this very last sentence that he said. He says, and I have a hieroglyphic lexicon to prove that. This doesn't mean jack. All he is saying here is that I have a dictionary. And because I have an Egyptian dictionary, this proves my point. And so you can tell that this person is not really well versed on the procedures on how to demonstrate a relationship between languages. So this first part is just going to kind of lay out the theoretical framework and assumptions, that's going to guide the rest of our conversation. And so, as I mentioned before, you have these scholars who make these claims that, such and such languages are related or not related, but have not done anything to prove that that is the case. And so this is something that was mentioned for Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, who's a linguist and a theologian in Nigeria, who's a native Yoruba speaker. And he's written many texts. And one of the texts is Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion, Connections Between Yoruba, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. And so on pages 44 and 45 of his text, he states that all the detailed search for nearer relationships within Kwa languages, this is supposed to be a subgroup of Niger-Congo, has not produced a single full-dress exposition or proof of the genetic relationship of the Kwa languages. Or can anyone cite any publication in which the relationship of Yoruba and Edo Benin has been conclusively proved? Or the relationship between Yoruba and Idoma? Or are we to take these on trust? We are not suggesting that these languages are not related. What we are saying is that those who are asserting the inadequacy of the evidence available for the relationship between Yoruba and the Semitic and ancient Egyptian languages, I should add, speaks as if, in comparison, the evidence for the relationship within the family of Kwa languages is copious. Up to date, it is not. So remember, this was written in 1996. There is a tacit assumption that the detailed proof is unnecessary in this area, but it is. It is necessary to provide a model of what is considered to be sufficient proof of genetic relationship between languages in West Africa. The onus for providing this model rests on the skeptics. And so what he's saying here is that, when people are looking at him comparing the Yoruba language, and remember, he's a bona fide linguist, him comparing the Yoruba language to the Semitic as if there is something wrong with that, he's letting you know that, some of these language groups that people are walking around touting exist and are valid are in fact not. And that's why he challenged them, produce a text in terms of Kwa. Give me who proved that the Kwa languages are a group, a family using the comparative method? Nobody. And so what he's informing the layperson here is that a lot of these claims made by linguists and historians are hypotheses that have yet to be proven. That people they have ideas, but the sufficient proof needed to validate the hypothesis has yet to be produced. And so this is something that we got to keep in mind. And so let me see. No, I won't read this. This is not relevant to what, but I'll leave it up just in case you want to read it. So if you come back to this, you can pause, you know, and read it for yourself. But I'll skip this for the moment. And so there's another text, and keep in mind that in Aluja Volume 2, I cite a number of texts which are which speak on what I'm about to cite here. I didn't cite this text in there because it just would have been overkill. And I have more texts for if anybody thinks this is a hoax or an illusion on my part. Excuse me. So this text is the Handbook of Comparative and Historical. Sorry, I'm dropping stuff here. The Handbook of Comparative and Historical Indo-European Linguistics, edited by Jared Klein, Brian Joseph, Matthias Fritz. And so there is an article or a chapter 12 in that text called The Comparative Method in African Linguistics. So remember, the text is about Indo-European, but there's a section where it's talking about, you know, different the comparative method as used in other language families outside of the Indo-European language family. So I'm just going to read. This is all one page, but I had to break it up into two. So in the study of African languages, historical linguistics played a most important role already before African linguistics became established as a discipline in its own right. An endless number of studies on language relationship and language classification have since been published, and several attempts were made at reconstructing the history of African language phyla and families. Until the mid-20th century, however, by far the majority of such contributions were based on mixed criteria. For example, economic, cultural, physical, anthropological, and linguistic. But even if purely linguistic criteria were applied, no dividing line was drawn as a rule between genetic and typological criteria. And, you know, I won't get into the details. We've dealt with that in other conversations. But, you know, typological criteria as used in this text is just, again, just surface commonalities that do not establish a genetic family resemblance or connection. And so what they're saying here is that for the African linguist, the Africanist, they don't make a distinction between genetic and typological data. And they'll be using typological data to talk about genetic relationships. And so that's like saying, for example, that, you know, you have the San people in South Africa who have very, you know, large derrieres on the women, for example. So say we went to some anonymous culture in South America, indigenous to there, and you saw a group of women with big butts. Because these are typologicals, they, you know, the types are being compared. The type being, you know, big derrieres, however we define big, right? Which would, of course, have to be larger than the world average, right? Because these two groups of people have larger than average derrieres, you know, it would be erroneous on an anthropologist to say that these, or a biologist to say that these two groups are genetically, you know, or closely related to each other because they have big butts. And so, you know, by analogy, this is exactly how a lot of Africanist linguists group languages together because they have typological features like, gender. So when we go back, for example, to the comment made, when he was talking about the Bantu languages, for example, lack grammatical gender. Grammatical gender is a typological feature. You would not make a connection between Egyptian and Bantu because, they have a presence or a lack of grammatical gender. Because it could be the case that, grammatical gender was borrowed by the ancient Egyptians, or it was lost by the Bantu speaking people. And so, that is some detail that is, again, going beyond what I intend to do today. But this is an example of what I mean, or what the document means, the text means when, there's this fine line between genetic criteria and typological criteria. So the gender of a language is a typological feature. You can't come to a genetic conclusion based on typological criteria. So let me go back. And so that's that there. So now we continue on, is technically the same page in the text, but I had to divide it here so that it can be easily digested. So they continue. This situation changed with the publication of a series of articles by Joseph Greenberg. I mentioned his name earlier, and he's the one who came up with the four phyla titles given. Well, I gave two earlier. That was Niger-Congo and Afro-Asiatic, but there's two others, Khoisan and Nilo-Saharan. So these are the language groupings that are popular amongst Afrikaners today, and they originated with Joseph Greenberg. So I'll start over. The situation changed with the publication of a series of articles by Joseph Greenberg on African linguistic classification, a revised version of which appeared later on as a monograph entitled The Languages of Africa. In this famous book, the author provided a complete genetic classification, and you notice that he has a complete genetic classification in quotes that distinguishes four genetic phyla, each containing a number of families and subfamilies. It is this taxonomy that in subsequent years was used most frequently by other scholars as a point of departure for new attempts at classifying African language groups. However, although Greenberg made exclusive use of genetic, in quotes, linguistic criteria, and in spite of the enormous impact of his investigation on follow-up studies, meaning the popularity of it, his classification was not based on the comparative method, but on an approach that Greenberg himself has called mass comparison, and that other scholars refer to as the method of resemblances. For a harsh critique of this method, see Fodor 1982. I guess you got to look at their bibliography. In fact, systematic application of the comparative method has been relatively rare to this day in African linguistics, as will be shown in this section. For reasons of economy, the discussion will largely be restricted to some general problems inherent in the employment of the comparative method in the African context. So he's saying a lot in this last paragraph here. So, one, he recognizes, as what African linguists have been recognizing from the beginning, like Sheikh Joke, Theophilo Benga, and others, is that the classification schema of Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and Khoisan were not built using the comparative method. And the comparative method is essential for developing language families. And we'll get to that later. And so secondly, the comparative method, as argued by the authors of this text, is rarely used to this date. This text was published in 2017. So this was 3 years ago. So up to 3 years ago, you would rarely find Afrikaners using the comparative method to make arguments about classifications among African languages. And this is, what this is what we've been saying for the longest, and why it's so hard for a lot of people to even grasp, for example, why we're able to say that ancient Egyptian is related to, languages outside of the Hausa language in Nigeria and in Congo and in South Africa and in Ghana and Mali, etc. Because we're applying the comparative method, whereas they are not. And so they don't know this particular process. And I want to thank Conan Lee for your donation, and it is greatly appreciated. Unfortunately, I can't, while I'm sharing the screen in full screen, make the comment stick, like a sticky comment, so it could show. So I just wanted to shout that out and let you know that I do see it, and I appreciate it greatly. And so I won't be necessarily reading all of your comments while I'm speaking, but I'll try to if I notice, any color on my phone that, a special comment has been made. So I will continue. So there is a linguist by the name of Lau Campbell. And in this textbook, the Handbook of Historical Linguistics, he has a chapter and an article titled How to Show Languages Are Related, Methods for Distant Genetic Relationship. And so hopefully this will come out well, that'll be understood by, those who are listening. And so I bring this up because, remember what the anonymous individual stated, that the Egyptian words look different than the Niger-Congo words. So that was his claim, his or her claim. I don't know what the gender is of the person who made the comment, but that person made the comment that Niger-Congo words are different. They look different than what you find in the ancient Egyptian lexicon. And as his proof, he has an Egyptian dictionary. So he, quote unquote, knows what he's talking about. And I would say that no, he does not know what he's talking about. So now I'm citing Campbell here, Dr. Lyle Campbell here, to show why, as I stated from the beginning, why we don't do lookership. Because lookership is not science. And so let me go here and then I'll make my commentary. While some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences. And I haven't read, one wonders why correspondences that are not so similar are not more common in such proposals. So we got to understand this in context. So what he's doing is challenging those who like to do the mass comparative method. And what he's saying here is that these people are making claims of genetic relationship based off of words that look alike. And based on his experience using the comparative method, when you're looking at, long range comparisons, the words in, let's say, language A and in language B are not going to look alike because of sound change over time. regular systematic sound change over time. Sound and meaning correspondences between the two languages establish that, you know, they're the same word, they're just pronounced differently in the respective languages. So he says, in terms of people's arguments that these languages are related, one wonders why correspondences that are not so similar are not more common in such proposals. Because in those proposals, all the words look alike in their comparisons. The sound changes that lead to such non-identical correspondences often change cognate words so much that their cognacy is not apparent. These true but non-obvious cognates are missed by methods such as multilateral comparison, aka mass comparison, which seek exceptional resemblances. For example, in the Hindi language, the word saka, a saka, from Sanskrit sakra, and where we get the word chakra from, and sing from Sanskrit shringa, are true cognates of English wheel and horn, respectively. So the word wheel in English is the cognate for the word chakra, because that's all. For those who really know what chakra means, it means wheels. You know, so when you're talking about your chakras, you're talking about your wheels, your so-called divine wheels along the spine or whatnot. And the same thing for this word sing. This don't look nothing like the word horn, but through a systematic analysis, we understand from Proto-Indo-European that the root kweklo, wheel, and kur, horn, is the origin of these terms. And they changed over time due to systematic and regular sound changes in the respective languages. So, but such forms would be missed by lexical inspection approaches, a method which scans only for phonetic resemblances, as multilateral comparisons or the mass comparison misses such well-known true cognates as French cinq, Russian piati, Armenian ping, and English 5, all easily derived by straightforward changes from original Indo-European pinque. These words don't look alike, but they are cognates. And so I want y'all to keep this in mind and in the back of your head when I'm showing these correspondences today. So, matter of fact, it is by the regular and systematic correspondences, in the forms are different, which greatly strengthens the argument that these two or more languages are related. So I'll continue. So now we go into our linguistic context. So just a brief note on the comparative method. The comparative method is a series of processes and tests that a linguist does to fully establish a connection between two or more languages, as well as, of course, the ultimate goal, which is to reconstruct the parent language. So, you know, the parent language usually, of course, is not written down anywhere. So we don't know what the proto-language that gave birth to the daughter languages, which we're studying today, sounded like or looked like. So we have to do a reconstruction process in the same way that a detective comes in and reconstructs the crime scene to get a sense of what went on at the time of the murder, you know, if it was a murder, you know. And so, you know, there's 7 main steps. The first step is to assemble cognates. Number 2, establish sound correspondences. Number 3, reconstruct the proto-sound. Number 4, determine the status of similar, partially overlapping correspondence sets. Step 5, check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of the overall phonological inventory of the proto-language. 6, check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of the linguistic universals and typological expectations. And 7, to reconstruct individual morphemes. And so, of course, this is very involved, and we do not have time to do all of that today. So what we're going to do today is just to demonstrate the first 2 steps. That is, to assemble the cognates, or what we call putative content cognates, and to establish the sound correspondences. And so before anybody can talk about any genetic relationship, this is the first thing that you do. And you do this with, the basic vocabulary. And so, hold on one sec. Okay. Let's check in to see if there's any questions in the chat. And it doesn't look like it is so we will continue. So now, the notes that I got from before was from Michael Weiss in the Handbook of Historical Linguistics. And, he goes on to say that the first step in applying the comparative method is formulating a hypothesis that the given languages to be compared are in fact descended from a common source. It obviously makes little sense to apply the comparative method to languages that evidently aren't related at any reasonable time depth, and the failure of the procedure to reveal any regularity of correspondence would be a strong argument against a theory of genetic common origin. Thus, the comparative method, strictly speaking, is not a method for generating relationship hypotheses, but rather it is a crucial tool for either confirming or not confirming such hypotheses. So, for example, from the beginning of our conversation, when the authors made the statement that the comparative method was not used in the establishment of none of the language phyla, that was a critical statement. Why? Because those are hypotheses, and you utilize the comparative method to confirm or disconfirm any of those hypotheses. So if I say that the Egyptian language is related to the Hausa language, I have to do an in-depth analysis and establish sound meaning correspondences between ancient Egyptian, specifically at a particular time period, and the Hausa language or group of languages. Without that scientific study, there's no way that you can make a claim that these two languages are related. And you confirm that hypothesis by the comparative method. So this, when they try to say that Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Khoisan, or Afro-Asiatic are language families, but the comparative method was not used in establishing these so-called language families, then these language families don't exist. They have not been confirmed. And so remember, the one citation we used was for 2017. And you can add my publication in 2020, that they still to this date have yet to utilize the comparative method to establish any of those 4 language phyla. They don't exist. And we have to keep this in mind. And so when anybody challenges you, when you're comparing, for example, Egyptian with Yoruba or the Ashanti, or the Wolof speakers or the Dogon, et cetera, and they say that you can't do that the Egyptian is related to this language, you challenge them and you force them to produce the definitive documents where the comparative method was used to establish that relationship. Without it, they have nothing. And so don't be afraid to look at the data. If they can't produce it, it doesn't exist. We don't take their word for it. We don't trust you. So how do we know that two or more words or whatnot are cognates? It's a very involved process. And so, what I'm giving you now is just kind of a rough thing, but an important rough thing. So a famous example is, comes from the English language and the CashApp language, which is a Mayan language in South America. Now, in English, we have this word mess, which means a dirty or untidy state of things or of a place. Then in the Mayan language, you have mess, which means mess or messy, disorder, garbage. So from the appearance of these two, they look alike. These must be the same word. Because in English, we spell it with M, and then the vowel is E, and then the second consonant is S, and we have an extra S over here. And then in the CashApp language, we have MES as well, and they both mean roughly the same thing. But in linguistics, just because something looks alike doesn't mean we accept them as cognates, because the test fails when we do a first initial consonant test. So when we start, basing or setting as a foundation for comparison in the English language, words that start with M, we see that there is no regular pattern. And we can give more examples and we will see the exact same thing here. So the word for man in CashApp is atsi. The word for mouse is choi. The word for moon is katiit. The word for mother is nan. No correspondences here. And so when we go back to mess and mess, we see that this is just what we call a chance lookalike. It's a coincidence. It's possible that the word mess was borrowed in the Mayan language from English speakers. But there's no regular systematic correspondences between the two languages. And so we do the same thing, for example, with Egyptian and let's say Semitic languages. And so this is from Aluja Volume 2. And I give a lot more examples, but I'm only putting a few up here from this table because it's a long table in Aluja Volume 2. The word Chikam is my way of saying Kemet or the Egyptian language. And so what you have here is Chikam dialect A in the first column, and then the source of these words in the Wartabush or other dictionaries. And then you have Chikam dialect B. So we assume that these are two different dialects. It's possible that they're two different languages that were present in the Nile Valley, but we'll assume that they're just dialects. And then we have the Akkadian language, which is a Semitic language, which is a contemporary language. This is the oldest attested language in writing for the Semitic languages. So the point here that I was showing is that in Egyptian, in Chikam dialect A, the K sound corresponds to this I or J sound here, which is really kind of an I or Y, a semi-vowel Y. And we see this going down. So we'll just go, row for row. Let's do the first 4 rows so that, you know, the point can be made. So we have, and this is our what we call a nasalized volar trill. It's a type of R sound. So you have ker, to say, and then you have iri, recite, and then words for to speak or to talk in Akkadian is dababu. So no, it doesn't appear that there is a correspondence here. But remember, looks are deceiving. So in order for us to invalidate dababu, to speak and to talk, we need to examine some more forms in the respective languages. So we have, you know, karer, wu, or karer wa, powers. And this W is a plural suffix, and this is a partial reduplication of the root here. But you have here iri, to do, to make, to create, to act as. And so really I think this W here is the noun suffix, and the plural is a result of the reduplication process here. But that's another conversation for another time. But the word power derives from a root, from a verb meaning to do, because what power is the ability to do. So it's the nominalized form of to do or to act or to create. So you have career powers, and then again we see that K in the first initial consonant position corresponds with E in Egyptian. So you have Alilu, powerful, and then Dananu, power strength, you know, of God, king, and enemy. Now there appears to be, you know, a possible correspondence here, but notice that there is no, when we look at the Babu beforehand, there's no forms here that correspond with it. So, you know, and as I discussed in the Luja Volume 2, this Alilu is a borrowing into the language from Egyptian. But we'll get into that at some other time. So we have Karir again, potent. And then we have Iri, to engender, to bear. And then the nominal form, ancestors, forebearers, the ones who engender. And so you have the adjective potent, the verb, and then the noun form here. And then you have Banu, to engender, sire, make, to build. Rehu, to copulate, to inseminate, make love, have sex. Again, no regularity here. There's no, all of these forms are different from each other, but all of the forms here are consistent in Egyptian. Karet, to carry, to support. Iru, delivery, cattle tax. And then there's other forms of the word, deliveries. And then furu, deliveries of offerings. So this nasalized volar trio corresponds dialectically to the regular R sound. It's consistent. But when we go over here into the Akkadian pile, there's no consistency. So we, just by using this example, we can show here that there's no regularity, and we cannot establish sound meaning correspondences for these phonemes in these consonant positions in Egyptian with the Akkadian. So it's not looking good in terms of irregular correspondences between. But remember the statement made by the anonymous commenter who was talking about that, you know, Egyptian is related to Semitic. And so we are to accept that, you know, they are related, but we can't find a series of regular meaning correspondences between the languages. And we can do this for other words, other phonemes. So again, this is a simplified, and I do just that in Aluja Volume 2 and in towards a comparative dictionary text that followed, a couple of months after the publishing of Aluja Volume 2. So just showing you how this works. So Frank Camerzel, in his article, Old Egyptian and Pre-Old Egyptian, Tracing Linguistic Diversity in Archaic Egypt and the Creation of the Egyptian Language, he gives us a set of rules, in essence, some things to consider when we're making the comparison between Egypt and other languages. So he's saying that the first one is that there are not only roots or word stems which are similar in shape and meaning, but both systems also exhibit similar sets of stem extensions and are derivative affixes used on the same basis. So they share the same morphemes. 2, their particular lexemes exhibit formally similar suppletive stems in both systems. So like a suppletive stem is like, good, better, best. If we find in another Germanic language a cognate for good, better, and best, this is a strong indicator that they are related, because these suppletive stems are highly unlikely to all be borrowed from an unrelated language. And so the third one is really important, and that is, in either system there are similar groups of semantically distinct lexemes which share the same phonological shape, or matching groups of phonologically distinct lexemes having the same meaning. So for example, roots of the consonantal shape ML, M as in Mary, L as in Larry, serve to express the semantic concepts black, sing, and weak in Indo-European as well as in Egyptian. Since there are no apparent universal conceptual resemblance between black, sing, and weak, the probability that two distinct languages denote these meanings by means of the same root independently from each other is extremely small. So it is, again, there's no correlation between the adjective black, the verb sing, and the adjective weak. They don't go together in any reasonable way. And so if we see a consonant sequence, M and L, in both Egyptian as well as in an Indo-European language or a series of languages, this will give us a good indicator that there's some type of relationship. It's still possible for there to be borrowings, but it is highly unlikely that they would independently come up with this phonological shape, which we see here by the starry formed, and then they just independently create a word with that shape, meaning black, sing, and weak, three distinctive lexemes. That's highly unlikely. And so, so what he's doing here is basically two consonant test. And I won't read all of this, but a similar test was done by our good brother Hermel Hermstein when he was comparing the Sumerian and the Proto-Bantu. And so, I'll just leave that there. But, it's also quoted in my 2020 work, Aluja Volume 2. And so now I'm going to put Camerzel's test to the test. And I'm going to show that using the same criterion and the comparative method, you will see this regular sound meaning correspondences between Egyptian and these languages that allegedly belong to Niger-Congo. And, it should be noted that if there was no type of relationship whatsoever, I got to go back now. If there was no correspondences to be found, it would end up, all of our comparisons would end up looking like this. We would have Egyptian on the left, and then we would say, Dogon or Dagura on the right, and you would see forms looking like this. There would be no correspondences. So if we, in the same way that we see the Akkadian here, and the Egyptian. So how you see there's no correspondences by these two consonant root systems here. And because of that, the expectation is that if, for example, Egyptian is not related to Bantu or relatable to Bantu, there would be no correspondences. So when I hear people talk about that Egyptian is not related to Bantu, I know for a fact they have not done any work whatsoever in this field, and we'll see why. So hold on while I take a sip of a non-alcoholic drink. So here we are comparing the Egyptian language, Chikam, what I call Chikam, and a Chiluba Bantu language. The Chiluba Bantu language is a language that is concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so I wanted to make sure, and y'all know that I've done dozens of hundreds of sound meaning comparisons between Chiluba and Egyptian. And so again, these are reduced forms because we just don't have that much time on the program. And I just wanted to make some things clear. So remember what I said earlier, what the scholar said earlier, that, if they're related, the forms are not going to be exactly the same. So when somebody says that the Egyptian and so-called Niger-Congo words don't look alike, he's right. A lot of them don't look alike, but we don't do lookership in science. We look for patterns. We look for the things that you can't see but are detectable during using certain tools and a number of experiments. And so if the Chiluba had no language correspondences with or valid language correspondences with Egyptian, we would not see the comparisons that we see here. So let's go through each one of these. So there's a word in Egyptian, kemet, which means dorsal fin. In Chiluba, we have musalala, which means fin, flipper. The mu is a prefix in Chiluba, and the T is a suffix in Chikam, or in Egyptian. We see here K corresponds to S. The Egyptian K corresponds to Chiluba S in the initial or first consonant position. The Egyptian M, as in Mary, corresponds to the L in the second consonant position of Chiluba. And we're going to see this pattern here. Doing the two consonant test that was established or was mentioned by Kammerzell, as well as our good brother Hermstein, and I can cite others. And that's because for the most part, the African languages are built off of a consonant vowel root. And so, anything beyond that are prefixes and suffixes to the root. So now, Kim, service, duty, work. In Chiluba, you have Sala, to do, to work, to serve. And of course, we can nominalize it with a prefix, which is like bu and busala, insala, which means, work or power. But you also have kusadila or koselela in Lingala as cognates for this word, and meaning to serve. So remember that work, like the word work, power, and energy, different words in English, but all essentially have the same meaning. And that is the ability to do work, in terms of the nominal form, the noun form, but they all, are derivative from roots meaning to work, to do, to serve, to create, to make, etc. That's what we mean by work. It's to be able to do. It's motion involved. Kim, to pay. Sela, to pay the dowry for a wife. Again, we see a pattern here. And so you always want to make sure that at minimum you have 3. But since we have a lot of skeptics, we have 3 other correspondences, and I can show more. So we have the word kemet here, and I have the word kemet with this spelling because kemet is spelled in different ways. And this is a irrigation channel here, and also a word, a hieroglyph, a determinative used for rivers. And so we have Musulu, river, brook, stream, creek. And I give, because this is done in my chapter 7 on the meaning of kemet. And so there's further conversation and explanation for why this is related here. And Kim, complete, put an end to. Sula, to be finished, completed. Kusala, at the end of, the point of, limit of, at the boundary of, at the border, edge, margin, bank, beach, or shore or coast. Ku here being a locative prefix, not the verbal prefix. And so it is from this root that you get the hieroglyph, which is the edge of a riverbank that I talk about in the text. But that's beyond what we are scheduled to talk about here. Then we have the causative form, sakim, to bring to an end, to finish out. And we have the same grammatical form, sudisha. The sha is also the causative in Egypt, in Chiluba, but it is suffixed, whereas in Egyptian is prefixed. But then go through until the end, to finish, etc. All throughout here, the same corresponding, we can establish, which we see here on the right-hand side, that Egyptian K corresponds to Chiluba S, and Egyptian M in the second consonant position corresponds to Chiluba L, as in Larry. And in other contexts, I show where K corresponds to K, and where M corresponds to M and B. And so there's a lot going on here, which further analysis, those extra steps in the comparative method, would help us to iron out. But before you can do any of those types of analysis and try to explain away what the different correspondences are, you have to establish and set this up. So this is a valid series of correspondences here. Don Williams asked the question, why is kemet written differently? Usually, I assume it's usually, it has the owl and the X in a circle. Off topic, but curious. This is, again, I mentioned earlier that there's different ways to write the word kemet. So there's kemet with the owl and the newt symbol, which is the 049 glyph. And this is the M36, and then you also have another one, the M33 glyph, N23 glyph, which is another irrigated land suffix, determinative, which is really a classifier. And then you have the one with the seated man and woman. And you also have one variation of the Netcher symbol, but that is actually for another town within Egypt called Kemet, short for Kemet Weret. But yeah, so I'll continue. So again, I'm showing here that if you just go off of lookalikes, you will never see the correspondences. You will never be able to systematically show. And so I've highlighted the correspondences in the red in terms of the roots. So remember that term Netcher. which is defined as divinity or God in the lexicon, in the dictionaries for Egyptian. In Chiluba, the first correspondence is Nkole or Nkwele, God. A biform of this word is Ba Nkole, spirits or ghosts, because that Ba is plural. And so we have the N of Egyptian corresponding to the N of Chiluba, the Ch sound, the T with the lowercase, excuse me, with the underlying bar, below it, corresponds to Chiluba K. So remember, we just did K, Egyptian to Chiluba S, but we see here that the Ch, which is a palatalized K, corresponds to Chiluba K. And then the R sound in Chikam, in the second consonant position, corresponds to L in the consonant position in Chiluba. So let's go back. So we just demonstrated that in Egyptian, the M as in Mary corresponds to L in the second consonant position. But in that same consonant position for Chiluba and Egyptian, now the R corresponds to L. So we have two different phonemes that correspond in Egyptian to L in the second consonant position in correspondence with Chiluba. And so we would have to document this. We would have to figure out why does that one phoneme in Chiluba correspond to two phonemes two phones in Chikam. So that is something that we would further investigate. But as we can see here, is regular. So when we go down to this neturit, fixed, solid, set, firm, hard. In Chiluba, it is kale, strong, well, vigorous, arduous, firm, steady, stable, solid, hard, immovable, fixed, steadfast, powerful, robust, tough as meat. And which would make sense because it is the KL consonant sequence that gives birth to the word for God, because it has to deal with power, the powerful one, the one who can create, and things of this nature. But we'll get into that later. Neturi, divine, sacred. Bukale, sacred. Neturu, priest of Ra. Makwidi, priest. From root Aquila, advocate for, defend, rule over, govern. Neter, power, divinity. Neter tiri, divine, strong. Bukole, strength, energy, express. Remember, as I said, that bu prefix nominalizes, it's the abstract prefix. So this concept of strength, energy, express. And so that same bukole for strength, energy, express is also the root of Nkole, God, Bayankole, spirits, ghost. And then we have Neteri, natron soda, trona, sodium bicarbonate, carbonate. And then we have mukele or mukela, salt, because that's all natron is. It's a form of salt. And so a note should be made here that in Chiluba, when the L sound is followed by I, the L turns into D. So it's pronounced G. So Makwiji, priest, from the root Aquila. So again, if there was no way in hell that Bantu, because the person started off with Bantu, that there was no correlation between Egyptian and Bantu, you would not see these types of correspondences. So you challenge any of the mofos on these words on Egyptian, that we're showing here. Challenge them to find a systematic correspondence between these biconsonantal roots with forms with Semitic, for example. Dare them. Tell them to come. And I've been challenging these folks for decades now. You won't find them. They're not going to do it because the correspondences don't exist. So I'm going to continue. And so remember what I said, lookalikes don't count. We're looking for systematic sound and meaning correspondences. And I put them in these tables in this way so that you can easily see them. There's no trickery done. Tall H says, Sar sound mad. Now I just get passionate about this because, you're constantly having to have these discussions with folks who are lazy as hell and don't want to do the work. Excuse me. And so, it brings it out of you. That's why they won't have no live. You know how many live conversations that I've challenged folks on and dared them to let's bring this in front of the public, in front of the people, and you show your work and I'll show mine. And all of them, every last one of them, have shunned away from that discussion. This is why. So let's look at this. So now, because I'm showing a pattern here. So now in Egyptian, we have these biconsonant roots, W and N. W as in, Wally's World, Walmart. And then N is in Nancy. So we don't know what the vowels are in between. But the consonants we know is W and N. So let's look at this. When, and we're just making up a vowel, so we're putting an E in between, an I or E in between the two consonants. So you have in Chicam or Egyptian, desert hare. And then in Chiluba, Kalulu, rabbit. So the W in Egyptian in the first consonant position corresponds to K in Chiluba in the first consonant position. Wait a minute. Didn't we just show here that K corresponds to S in Chiluba in the first consonant position? And now we're about to show that L not only corresponds in Chiluba to Egyptian M, Egyptian R, and now Egyptian N is in Nancy in the second consonant position. So you have Kalula, rabbit. When, to open. Kanuna, to open. And sometime as a result, L will turn into N in certain environments, and we can get into that. Because their N also corresponds to Chiluba N, but that's another table. So when, to exist, to become, essence. Wikadi, essence, to be. From Ikala, to be. Again, WWW, KKK, NNN, LND. But remember what I said about D. When L is followed by I, L turns into D. So this this D is a phoneme of L in this correspondence here. So let's continue. Win-win, to move to and fro. Jikula, remove, move away. Winnet, fortress. And there's a nominal T suffix here. It turns the verb into a noun. So in this form, bikole, strong, very strongly, with strength. And so it's from this notion of strong and strength that this T suffix turns that adjective and there's another verb form into the noun. So Iwun, a god, a pillar, an epithet for Osiris. And of course, Nkole and Kwele, God, because they both come from this root meaning strength. And in this sense, a pillar to hold up or whatnot. And so Iwin, pillar, column. In Chiluba, Jikunji, column, stake. And in Kikongo, Mukulu, pole. And then Mukuna, mountain, hill. And Jileke, which is the inverse, pole. And so these look like irregularities, but I demonstrate, I discuss these further in the text and show what a justification is. Because when we go beyond this simple list, again, this notion of power and strength associates itself with mountains, hills, poles, columns, and then, of course, gods, spirits, and even kings. And so the word Nkole is also not only used for God, it's just used for anybody in a position of power. So it's just a prolific and a profound and a powerful person when it's associated with a human being. So again, if there was no way in hell that Egyptian was not related to Bantu, we would not see these correspondences. I dare anyone to list these forms that I have in Egyptian and compare them to any in the Cushitic language or in the Semitic languages or Berber. I dare any one of y'all to find these correspondences with these words and beyond. It's not going to happen. So even when we do the reconstructions, and so this is from the Proto-Great Lakes Bantu. So we already established with Chiluba that the L and N, that Egyptian N, and Chiluba, which is a Bantu language, L corresponds. We get extra backup of that correspondence with this set of correspondences. But this right here is the Proto-Great Lakes Bantu. And, if you have Aluja Volume 2, this is I discussed this in chapter 2 or 3 when I'm dealing with the word Seneb. And so I'm showing here that Middle Egyptian Neb, NB, corresponds to the Proto-Great Lakes Bantu as L and M. And you can see the sound correspondences always in this final column over here. So when we have Neb, creator, builder, Lem in Proto-Great Lakes Bantu, create, string a bow. And then with the I, agent suffix, Lemi, a creator or a maker. Neb, a plant. It doesn't say what kind of plant it is, it's just a plant. But given our sound correspondences, we know it corresponds with Lama, Combrentum species, which is a plant. Neb, to protect. And then Lam, to look after. And I show in the text where even in Egyptian, the word to look after, to care for, is also the word for to protect. So this is in the same semantic field. And so we have that same I, and actually no, this is a different I here in this instance, because the agent suffix is W in this form here, and which would be mu in Bantu. And so you have Neb, Lord, Master, Owner, Husband. Lim in verb form, rule, govern, dominate. And so we can see in this dialect of Middle Egyptian, they lost a lot of the grammatical affixes that belong to these words that derive from verb roots. And so we have Nebet, lordship, authority of, king, authority of the king, for example. And so it lets you know that it has to deal with this notion of to rule, to govern, to dominate. And then we have Seneb, to be healthy, health, to heal. The correspondence in Proto-Great Lakes Bantu, those Great Lakes Bantu speakers in the eastern portion, is Lamu, good health, life, and longevity. And I show in the text that the S in Seneb is a prefix. Is why I have it dotted the way that I do here. And so I have a whole chapter on this. But as you can see, even in the reconstructed forms, it is regular. And so now Middle Egyptian B in the second consonant position corresponds to M in the Proto-Great Lakes Bantu, second consonant position. And L and N correspond in the first. So we know that in Middle Egyptian N corresponds to Bantu L, which in Proto-Bantu is D. And which we can tell comes from a G sound, but that's going beyond, my intent today. So this is the stuff that you do in the preliminary work. So again, if there were no chance in hell that Egyptian was, not related to Bantu, then you would not see these types of correspondences continuously. And so, since we're dealing with proto forms, hold on. Had to take another sip of my non-alcoholic drink. So now we're going to the general Proto-Bantu. So we're seeing here correspondences also with the Sumerian language. So we have Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, and Egyptian. So we have Badu, side of, body, rib, side. Sumerian, outside, other, side, also back, shoulder, and liver. Beru, outside. And so Proto-Bantu B corresponds to Sumerian B, corresponds to Egyptian B, and Proto-Bantu D corresponds to Sumerian R and Egyptian R in the second consonant position. And we're going to see this same correspondences all throughout, so Bada, same consonant sequence, open place. So remember, so when you see this BR out here outside and bar outside. So just a different vowel that follows. And so you have the side and then an open place, therefore outside. So Bada, color or speck. Then you have Bada, a color term. And then Bur, pigment, a pellet of pigment from the New Kingdom. Still the same sound meaning correspondences. Then you have Bid in Proto-Bantu, boil, be cooked. Then you have Bala, to boil meat and water. And then Bur, to boil over. So now, and actually this is an error right here, because this should be an L in this here. We see an L where, normally there is an R when we're comparing these two consonant sequences in Proto-Bantu. And so this seems like an anomaly here, but it actually is not. And so R and L, we will see, are kind of allophones in certain contexts and or whatnot. So other tables which I use show consistently Proto-Bantu D corresponds to both Sumerian R and L. But let's continue. Bod, count. Bur, a unit of area, a unit of volume. Bury, measure of a length of a rope. So it's some kind of measure, some kind of count. And then there's no Proto-Bantu form, but you have bara, a fish in Sumerian, and then you have bur, a mullet, a type of fish, again, from the New Kingdom. And so we see these correspondence. So now we have 3 languages that we're using involved here. So if Bantu was not related to Egyptian, we would not see correspondences between Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, and Egyptian at the same time. It would not exist. You would not be able to see this. It would look like the English and the Coptical examples that we saw earlier dealing with, the so-called mess coincidence and correspondences dealing with the M in the initial position. You would not see this. This would be impossible. But this is what those who have a problem with comparing Egyptian with Bantu never want to address. They'll never address this in any systematic way. Someone asked, Baba Heru asked, wouldn't the T in Nebit be a feminizing? Let me go back to the table. So he's talking about here in Nebit, lordship, authority. It is not a feminine T. It is a nominal T. And there's different types of T's that serve different functions in the language. And so this is something that, not too many people are aware of. And, that's one of the things that I discuss heavily in Alluja Volume 2 in our show. And matter of fact, we'll see an example of this. So Baba Heru, keep that question in mind towards the end of this presentation. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. And so going back now to this table. So again, we're going Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, and Egyptian. So we have different words now. And so I'm showing you here that Proto-Bantu T, as in Thomas, corresponds to the sh sound, as in shut up, in the first consonant position in Sumerian, also corresponds to the sh sound in Egyptian. As well as when we get to the second consonant position, the nasalized velar, this is 2 different sounds. So this G sound is nasalized in this sense, but that is not the same as in Sumerian, where we have what we call a nasal velar. This is one sound that is pronounced ng. And then in Egyptian, we have shin, or the N sound is in Nancy as the second consonant in this word. So of course, again, as always, I like to show my work. So the sound correspondences is what you'll find over here. And normally we would use a different symbol for this N because it will be the ng symbol itself, but I didn't put it here. But just notice, for those of you who are linguistically astute, I am very well aware that, when we're using the IPA, that we would use the nasal velar symbol here. So, so tang, drip, fall in drops. Then you have sheng, to fall as dew, to rain, and then the noun rain. Then you have shini, rainstorm, dew. Shenech, rain cloud. Shenech, water spout in lion form. So we can see here that this shin is suffixed by 2 different graphemes, here, and gives a different form of the word, or a different semantic level of the word. So now you have tangu, house, ground, and wall in Proto-Bantu. We don't have a corresponding form, or at least I couldn't find a corresponding form in the Sumerian, at least that matched these forms. But we have in Shikam, Shinangwa, Shinachwa. workhouse, farm building, storeroom, and private house, barracks. Same here, deck house. Now with this T, because this T here is not feminine. It is a place. Matter of fact, both of these are place suffixes, the W and the T. And so, you know, this has to deal with space, buildings or whatnot. Now we go down here. Tangu, ground, ashag, field. So this G is not the same as this N. But now notice that we have a different second consonant here in Egyptian, the D sound. So as I stated, the D comes from a G, a nasal G. And so we can see that the Proto-Bantu and the Sumerian, at least for these three words, has the older form, and that this D derives from G. So it's usually G, Z, from G to D. And so ground, and then field meadow, parcel of land. Tang, reed, and she, with the loss of the G segment, to call, and shedi, to read. And to read and to call are the same thing. And I discussed that in the note in the text. You have tengu, antelope, hippotragus species. Then in Sumerian, the same word is used instead for sheg, meaning deer or mountain goat. And then in Shikam, shedu, or shedwa, skin, a water skin. And then you have a different form, shafit, ram of a moon. But this is, again, we got to pay attention to the grammar of these suffixes, which change the meanings of certain words and applications. But the skin, the water skins that they use are what they get from like deer. So like if you ever get, go to some country white folks' house who like they hunt deer and stuff like that, and you see a rug made out of, like a bear or, or a deer, and you see the head on the wall, like people make skins out of the deer or antelope and even cattle, of course, because and then of course we make shoes out of gators and the whole nine. But to show that this is in the same semantic, and so you have to be able to justify this reasonably, and then of course to be able to show this in other related languages so that it sticks. But doing the same thing. So now again. And I have to be exhaustive like this because, they'll think that this stuff is coincidence, that I'm just making, that I can only show a few examples. And that's not the case. So now let's go to Proto-Bantu again. So instead of B in or whatnot, it's M in as the consonant sequence for Proto-Bantu that we're examining. And we're mainly concerned with the consonant sequence in Proto-Bantu and Sumerian because in Egyptian, we don't have the vowels. So right now, we're only concentrated on the consonant sequence. So just like how Camazel was talking about the ML sequence and how that ML sequence, there's a word ML, whatever vowels in between that mean black, and sing, and I forgot what the third word was, but these are unrelated words with the same consonant sequence in both Indo-European and Egyptian. And so by the same token, we can do the same thing between Sumerian, Egyptian, and Proto-Bantu. And so for this consonant sequence of M and N, for the first row, we have stone, and then Sumerian Baal, type of stone. Notice that both Proto-Bantu and Sumerian, the first initial vowel is A. And so now we have L and N corresponding with between Proto-Bantu and Sumerian in second consonant position, and then Benwit, hard stone, Kern. And so remember the Ben stone is also from the same root. It's just the root Ben means stone. And matter of fact, the word amen in both Egyptian and in Semitic comes from this word meaning stone. But we'll get into that in some other time. And I get into it in the first chapter in Alluja Volume 2. And so we have Mui, shine, splendor. Bur, shine, glow, light. Wabin, to shine. This W is a prefix on the bin root. And notice that there's no second consonant in Proto-Bantu. What I argue here is that it was lost. And I go through a series of lost second consonants in Proto-Bantu. But we know that this isn't just Mui, shine, that there should have been a consonant, a liquid consonant here, because of the Sumerian and Egyptian. This is why it's important to compare with these older written languages. Because when we look at this in the context of a family relationship, Proto-Bantu can let us know a lot about Sumerian and Egyptian, and Sumerian and Egyptian can let us know a lot about Proto-Bantu. And so they feed off of each other. And so now we have min, press, to squeeze. And then Sumerian, bara, to mix. And then barag with this G suffix to press. And Proto-Bantu and Bantu languages also have this suffix. But in the dictionaries, they're only concerned with the roots in Proto-Bantu. And then penet, to knead bread, to squeeze, to crush during brewing. So now notice that in the first two, M in Proto-Bantu in the first consonant position corresponded to B in both Sumerian and Chicam. But in this row, M corresponds still to B in Sumerian, but to P in Egyptian. So to show that this is not an anomaly, we need at least two more examples to show that this is a regular correspondence. So now we go to the next row. Moni, pull out, come out. Bala, to draw out, to pour out. Penes, pull out hair, cut off a joint. And this S is a verbal suffix. And you see this S in this next one as well. So min, bend. Bala, turn, to rotate. Turn over, to cross. Pinin, to twist. And then penes, to twist again. And so again, this S is a verbal suffix. Memin, this is a partial reduplication, meaning to pour off. Bala, to pour out in Sumerian. And then waber, to pour out. Waber, to distribute, to pour out. And so now we're seeing the N corresponding to the nasalized uvular trill in Egyptian. And so it should be noted that the nasalized uvular trill also corresponds internally with N in Egyptian. So this is a solid correspondence. And we see the same thing with med, dew, and then moisture, perspiration, and then moist and damped. Again, this is another word where the Egyptian informs us that they lost a segment. There's a second consonant missing. But in all of what we see here, the correspondences are regular between Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, and Egyptian. Hold on. Peace and love, first and foremost, to my grandfather who was in the chat room, Baptiste Fosters. So thank you for your comment. And to Brother Hassan, he makes the statement, Arabic comes from Meta Nature, not the other way around at Ramza. I would have to disagree. If you are talking about Arabic, the language, it does not come out of Egyptian. It comes out of Proto-Semitic. But if you're talking about the script, ultimately it is argued by many scholars that the Arabic script comes ultimately out of Demotic. So if you're speaking about the the script, then I can agree with that. But if you're talking about the language, for which, you know, Egyptian in terms of the Seshmet or Nesher, didn't know. Okay, so I'm gonna continue on. So we see the same thing here, and I can go on for days with these languages and with these words. So now we have a different set of languages. Excuse me, a different set of phonemes. So we have Proto-Bantu. The consonant sequence is D and K, or D and G, or G or NG again. And so it's D followed by a velar sound, either a voice velar being a G or a nasalized voice velar. The G sound, really G, or the voiceless velar, which is the K sound. And so we have duke, plate, or two plate in terms of the verb. And then you have lug, twist. So we have D corresponding with L in Sumerian. And what I show here is that the nasalized uvular trill corresponds to D in Proto-Bantu and L and D in Sumerian. And so that this M in Marak, rope, is a prefix. And so the consonant correspondence is here. So remember what I said in this slide here, that the nasalized uvular trill, this R type sound, interchanges and also corresponds with N, even in Egyptian. So we proved that here with this root here. You know, some would say nai or nahi, to twist a rope. And so this is the verb form. This M nominalizes this root here, meaning to twist and to plait. And now, so the nominal form is rope. And so it's the same dialectical form here. And so we have dungi, good and beautiful. We have du, be good, be sweet, goodness. And then we have reket, what is good, profitable. Reket, good, beneficial, useful. Some people would say ah, but that's not an A sound. It's not a vowel. It's an R type sound. And then, of course, that R corresponds to N. And so you have compassion, benevolence in this word here. And so I use this table in the text to prove some other arguments in terms of this sound corresponding to this, as well as, you know, G, M, B, and some other stuff. Dewy, heap, lu, to be abundant, heap up. And then raki, to flourish, to inundate, to grow green. Rechek, flood. Recheki, abundance. And then rerej, abundance. It's the same thing. So both Proto-Bantu and Sumerian are missing the second consonant in this form here. But that's what it means in terms of to be abundant, to heap up, to gather a great large load. They're all in the same semantic context. Dago, house. In Sumerian, dag, dwelling, residence. And then rekiet, a room, a storeroom. And then you have, of course, its in form over here, a house. Dang, to shine. The dag, be bright. Reket, fire, flame. Reket, or rich, fire, flame. And reket, shining one, Hathor. Nahi, travel. Nahi, propel. I have a whole discussion on ultimately, because they come from to shine. To shine and be bright, and fire, flame comes from a root meaning to propagate forward. And so this is the cognate with the word so-called Ra pronunciation in Egyptian. But again, we can show regularity, and I show the systematic correspondences for all of these greater in the text. And so we continue with that same, you know, series of Proto-Bantu D corresponding to a velar sound in the second consonant position. Dong, speech. Teach. Dug, speak, talk, say, order. Reku, spells, magical, creative power. Wu requi, to rejoice. Nahi, proclaim. Nahu, to convey. Again, all the same semantic field, and they obey the sound laws which we have established. Ding, to search for, to desire, to watch for. Udug, admire, observe. Aldug, to desire. Riki, God's eyes. And then we see a more closer form, which may be a borrowing in Egyptian. Digi, look at, to see and behold. And so, because this comes from, again, to shine, and then to see, and then eyes, and all of that other kind of stuff. And so in these African languages, the word for eye and the word to see are all built off of the same root. And so now we go to a different language. Give me a second. Let me see. Okay. I don't know what y'all are talking about over there. So now, still within the Bantu universe, I'm going to move to the Bassa of Cameroon. And so, as I showed in the text dealing with Ma'at, that M is a prefix in these variations. In, Ma'at is more so pronounced merchit. Merchit. You can say merchit or merchit. That's more so how you would probably pronounce it closer to in Egyptian than Ma'at. That's not how the original form was stated. And so we have mahi, rope, and then mahat. Remember that twist to turn and everything, but also to unify, to put together, gives words for rope and, gathering, unity, and entire. And so, so in my unifying principle that holds all of creation together, because in the same word meaning to put together, to tie. And so it's this notion of gathering. That's why, like, when you to plate or to twist in the form that we saw earlier. Let's go back. No, for this form here, remember, to plate or to twist, and it comes out for the word for rope that we see here at the top. We get better clarity, when we're looking at these Bassa forms, because it gives the same semantic range, because to plate and to twist is to unify, to tie together. And so when you gather, you can either tie by twisting or weaving, or you can gather by or uniting, making one by like sweeping together or heaping together. It's all the same thing. And so we see that the nasalized of Ular Trill now corresponds to Bassa, the implosive B, like ba. It's like I can't even pronounce it really, but it's a B type sound that we don't have in English. And then, of course, this sound here corresponding to K or some other nasalized velar. And so the sound correspondences are over here on the right-hand side, but we have, Ma'at, level, balance, bulk, leveling. Ma'u, wind, breeze, and then Ma'he, to sail, and then Mbuk, wind. Ma, base, pedestal, Mbak, a stand or a container. Ma, orderly management, order, harmony. Ibag, structuring, arranging, ordering, grouping together harmoniously, order, structure. Ma, village. Mboko, kinship, family, village. Mbai, village. The K sound was palatalized into Y. And then you have, Mahawu, the leader, or Mahawi, the chief. And then Imbo Mbag was a partial reduplication, manager of social institutions, head of a lineage, which would be equivalent in the Bassa community to a leader or the chief. But there's a lot of Imbo Mbags in the community, so that their group kind of like the Dagura people. It's more so the elders, kind of govern more so than you have a chief or a king. Then Ma'at, governing social principles, do's and don'ts. And then you have Libag, tradition, culture, system of social attitudes. Ma, to kill, slaughter, sacrifice. Mbuk, destroying violently. Ma'u, sell, to sell on. And then you have Ma, fabric and linen. Then you have Mbuingai, shade, curtain, sail, noun, to spread out the sail. Ma, truth, and then Ngamba, genuine, real, true, which is the inverse of these other forms here. But we can see that the correspondences here are regular. Anybody want to challenge and say that Bantu languages do not display any regular sound meaning correspondences because they don't look alike or what you believe they should look alike? Show them this video. And let's have a public discussion about it. I'll even write it out, for it. And so this is just a close-up of, a few of the things that I showed earlier. But I wanted to show here again that the M is a prefix and that, it corresponds. So we have here Egyptian, Kikongo, and Basa. And so Rek, abundance. Reki, to be inundated. In Kikongo is Bweka, to abound, being in abundance. And then in Basa language in Cameroon, Kikongo being in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Imbuegai, surplus, overabundance, excess. And then we have these variations dealing with plants and crops in Egyptian. Then we have Mbongo, general name for vegetables and things cultivated for food, seeds, food. Mbiki, seeds, pips of the gourd, kind, vegetable. But we don't see a correspondence here in Basa. Then Rek, ships, equipment, masts, spears. And then remember, we already demonstrated that this sign here corresponds to this sign. And so we have a building component, a construction material. In Kikongo and Bangu, large tree. In Bangu, ridge or a pole. So all of this stuff has to deal with wood, large mast and things. They're just long poles or ridges. To coat, to plaster, to repair. Buka ma being a suffix. To lie on the face downwards, to be topsy-turvy, to be closed, to be covered, to be smothered. So when you say to coat something is to smother, to plaster over with something. To this, hahihi, to injure, to blame. Baka, to charge with, accuse of, with the abstract term for the accusation. Same form, speak a foreign language to interpret. In Boka, to converse. And in Basa, Banga, speech. It has to deal, all of these have to deal with speech. Raket, field, arable land. In Basa, Mbak, land. Iket, thing, goods, offerings. And the E sound and the nasalized vula trill also interchange in the first consonant position. In Chikam, these are some things that you should just know. And then in Bongo, clothes, goods, wheels, possessions, property. And so we can see that, these correspondences in between Kikongo and Egyptian, another Bantu language, shows regularities. They're not going to look alike. And so, we're just going to have to make people big mad when people make these claims. And so everybody who makes these claims that Egyptian is not related to so-called Niger-Congo languages, they never show stuff like this to disprove that hypothesis. We make those arguments, even though we don't adopt the Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, or Afro-Asiatic hypotheses for reasons which I explain in Alluja Volume 2. We can easily show these correspondences, but they will never show correspondences like this to prove that any of these Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, or Afro-Asiatic even exist. And so now I can do, this is just Dagura. I'm just showing different Niger-Congo languages where we can show, systematic sound meaning correspondences. And so this is the Dagura language out in Burkina Faso. in West Africa. Hold on. Now, so we have in Dagura, per, bottom. Then we have in Egyptian, heru, base, bottom, underside. Puo, belly in Dagura. Het, body, belly, womb. And again, the correspondences you'll see on the right-hand side. We have kui, a hole. In Egyptian, ikinu, a hole. Kokor, voice. Heru, voice, sound, quarrel. So when you say mak or maheru, true of voice, hru. And so this corresponds with the Dagura kokor. This is a partial reduplication of the same. So we have pele, a basket. In Egyptian, bur, a basket. Poi or poe, oath, a vow. And then we have rebu, wishes, vow. Rebet, wishes, vow. It is the inverse here. And the nasalizer volar trill seems to be missing in the Dagura. And so we know this by way of this other form that we'll look at here and at the bottom. But we have bor, a canoe, and then we have baru, cargo boat. And then we have bo, a hole, a grave. And then we have buri, hole, beri, hole, cavern. Again, the nasalizer volar trill is missing, but it's also possible that the nasalizer volar trill turned into O. And so everywhere we see this nasalizer volar trill, we see a O sound or a rounded vowel sound. So it's more than likely really that's the correspondences. And this R here is an extra segment in this word for canoe. And so we have wa, to come, and then we have iwi, to come, to return. And then we have jia, today, and then we have rau, sun, day. E, and then we have E here, I, me, my, and zu, head, and then we have jur, head, tip. Again, the nasalizer volar trill is missing, but it could correspond over here. It corresponds to O sounds, possible O sounds, but it may be a U here. But the point is that there's some kind of rounded vowel that it may, and so that takes more investigation. And so this actually should be 0 here. So this is a mistake on my end here. And there's some other ones that I do between Dagura, but these are just, some that I was showing here. And I think the last group that I will be dealing with is the Egyptian and Yoruba. So we dealt with Bantu, we dealt with, we gave some Dagura correspondences, we did Sumerian, and now we're going to deal with the Yoruba. So remember, the dude was right. Whoever made the comment that if you look at Egyptian and you look at, so-called Niger-Congo words, they look different. But as I stated previously, looks are deceiving, and this is why we don't do lookership. So now, but this is one of those cases where they do kind of look alike. And so we have Itinu, obscurities, riddles, and Chikam. Then we have Itan Lasan, myth, from Itan, story, narration, tale in Yoruba. So Egyptian T corresponds to Yoruba T, and Egyptian N in the second consonant position corresponds to Yoruba N. And some dictionaries don't even write out the N anymore because I think they're losing it, and the N has been absorbed by the vowel. So you have these nasalized vowels in Yoruba. And so that's a sound change that is happening as we speak. But now we have itin, light, and then we have itana, lamp, flowers, so-called for their brilliance. Itin, to shine, to illuminate. In the Yoruba language, tan, to light a lamp or torch, to shine, radiate, entice. seduce, lure, deceive, spread, scatter. Itan, a being related to, or a being related, to be related, and then spreading. Itanu, the act of casting away, casting off. Aten, resting place, a perch. And itan, thigh, lap. And this will take some explanation, but the lap or the thigh being the resting place of the baby, so to speak, in the Yoruba. So it's a semantic shift. And then, we switch it up a little bit here. So instead of T, N as in Nancy, is T, M as in Margaret for these final three correspondences. So Tim, to be complete. Tan, finish, to finish, cease, exist, or extinct, be at the end, annihilate, to heal, to cure. Tim, crusher. Tan, violently. Temer, mat. Then atin, a soft mat which can be folded. And so this nasalized uvula trill suffix here in Chicam, we'll find that for the most part, it is lost in the Yoruba language. And so we continue. So now that same TN correspondence in the Yoruba now corresponds to a totally different sound sequence. So now we have wahim with an H sound. Further, again, to repeat. And then tune, again, once more. Him, verb associated with curing an illness. Yoruba, tan, to heal, to cure. Him, to tread with your feet. Tona, to follow, and I'm not saying all the pronunciation right in Yoruba because I haven't mastered the tones. I'll say tona, to follow the road, to trace the path. Itona, a going in a way, a path. Hemi, helmsman. Hemiyet, steering oar. Tona, to take lead, to guide. That's what a helms does. It guides or steers a boat. And so hu, driver, slugger, shepherd, which is the same root, but because of the intervocalic position of the M turns into W. So when we see W here, it is an allophone of the M and also the B sounds. So we have here him, a jug for milk or wine, and then we have otum, a small pitcher of or a mug used for keeping holy water at a shrine. Him, coward. Itini, disgrace, a failure. Hiwi, to strike, to blow. Atoni, a provoker, aggressor. Coming from a root meaning the same thing, but this A nominalizes it. But notice that they both have the same I suffix. Hu, utterance. Tinu, from the mouth. But itumo, meaning explanations, elucidation, illustration, interpretation, comment. Atumo, commentator, expositor. And so we see, regularities here. The only one as far as this table is concerned is the M in the second consonant position. But believe me, I demonstrate that the M and M go together in other contexts in between Yoruba and Egyptian. And matter of fact, I'm working on an entire book that is going to be dedicated to Yoruba and Egyptian correspondences. And so that I have yet to see a book dedicated to that, in a strict linguistic fashion. And so it is going to be an analysis of Modupe Oduyoye's work, and I'll be extracting his correspondences and analyzing them and giving my critique. And then I'm going to be adding my own correspondences so we have a more complete book so we can establish the sound laws between Egyptian and Yoruba. And so again, if Egyptian and Yoruba were not related languages, we would not be able to see these types of correspondences in the basic vocabulary. And so we have hen, to be fresh, to provide with, otun, newness, freshness, novelty, new, fresh, recent, Henu, jar, chattels, or tune, a small pitcher we saw earlier. Hin, a protective container. And so this lets you know that for some of these, the M and N correspond dialectically in Egyptian. Henti, in, limits. Tan, finish, to cease, extinct. We saw this earlier. Hen, a bad quality, greed. Tini, one who disgraces another. Hen, to hurry, pass by, retreat, to go speedily, to journey, to go. Atona, one who walks about the road, a spy. Remember, the A is a nominal agent prefix. And then we have Itona, a going in, a way or a path. Hen, to grow of a lotus. Tana, to flower, to blossom. Hen, to command orders. Tenu, from the mouth. Atumo, again, same thing that we saw with the hem variant. So that hem variant is a variant of hen here. And then hem, drive back, repel. And then tanu, to cast out, to reject. So this is an anomaly as far as these two consonant forms are concerned, but not really. And so that other stuff is explained in other works. But we can continue on. And so we can show here that the B's correspond in between Yoruba and Chikam. Abo, shelter. Ebo, refuge, shelter. In Chikam. Igbo, the name of a trailing plant and its fruit. Ib, plant. Ibo, breath, with dimension, a kind of banyan tree. Ib, a tree. And so this concept of breath with is the root for many names for tree in the African languages. So this is not surprising at all. Iba, the act of hiding. Ambuscade, the act of weaving or plaiting coarse grass into a mat. And Ib, part of a net for trapping, birds. It's this idea of the net, which you have to weave or whatnot, which corresponds to this part, the act of weaving or plaiting coarse grass into a mat. So the same way you weave and create a mat, it's the same way you weave and create a net for fishing or for trapping birds. And so that same process again gives another form, a rope. Bo, to cover, to hide, to overwhelm. Ibo, or ib, to conceal, to take in. Ibi, evil, ill use, afterbirth. Ib, to be hostile, to be against someone. Obon, beetle. Ib, beetle. And so we see that the Yoruba has the added in, but what was lost in the Egyptian. But these words for bugs usually come about by way of a root, meaning to propagate, to move, to flutter, to fly, things of that nature. And so we have in this form in Egyptian, ber, tremble, shake, move about, jump about, and then bend, to leap into the air. All of these roots end up being words for birds as well as insects. And then Igbo, casting of lots, or dice used by priests when consulting the gods. And then we have Berer, omen, wonder, marvel, oracle in the Egyptian. And again, the nasalized volar trill is lost in the Yoruba language. And so, that has to be kept in mind. And so again, if anybody, who is listening, wants to challenge any of these correspondences, we can pick a time and we'll do all this and I'll show you more. But, we're going to go into more, here with the Yoruba and the Egyptian. Hold on one sec. Afro-Asiatic is saying all Afro-Asiatic at root, not to Fuins, E1B1, and Levant Ears of 12,000 BC spoke Afro-Asiatic language, according to Christopher Arab. He's still stuck on Afro-Asiatic. And Tale says Hausa influenced Yoruba. In fact, Yoruba is a Hausa term. Yoruba is not a Hausa term. And if you are referring to Salau's PhD dissertation, He did not prove his point on that, and I have the presentation, and it sucked big time. But anyway, we're not going to go there, so we'll continue. So again, we're doing Yoruba. We're doing a different set of sound correspondence, and we can go through the whole inventory of sounds in the vocabulary, and this is how we fully establish. But this is just a demonstration of what you would need to do to show as the first step in eliminating chance as a reason for the alleged correspondences. And so we have jin jin, to strike, a percussion instrument. Then Yoruba, dun dun, a kind of drum. Then jinin, hardships, torment, flogging. Jin jin, arduous task. Yoruba, dun, to pain, to be painful, to grieve, to cause regret. And then we have jama, misery. And so again, a different form of the same word, this time with the M sound. So there's something going on, here between the N and the M that further research will iron out, which has, but we just don't have time to do it here. So now we have hajin, to become angry, to be angry. And so we know that the dotted H is a prefix because we have a different form, janid, jadid, wrath. And then we have in Yoruba, dinu, revengeful, morose, cantankerous. And then we have din din, to be angry, to rage. So there was a sound change from the j or the z sound to d. As I mentioned before, you have g, j, and d as the sound evolution in the languages. And we see that here in the Chicam. And so we have dini, a block of stone. Dina, a block in Yoruba. Dinwut, family, families. Idile, family. And then, and so we have this L, which is irregular in our correspondences here, but in other forms we can show that they do correspond and we're solid. So Dinet, throne. Denit, land register. And then Odun, the lower one, the land. And, you should know that words for seat and words for throne usually comes from words for below and to sit. And then words for below and even to sit become the words for land in many instances. So this is one of those cases. And, a different set of Egyptian and Yoruba. And so and I know this seems boring to folks, but this is the boring work that has to be done. And so when people start making these claims, you show them this stuff. And so we have khib, quib, quib, to strike down, quib, quib, rubble in the Chicam. And it corresponds to Yoruba, ba, to sweep, cleanse, slap, strike with a stick or something flat, drift. Now, I should let you all know that in the Yoruba language, the G and B sound is one sound. They go together. You pronounce them simultaneously. It's ba. And the next word, be. You say them together. But this is the result, as proven through external correspondences, that the Yoruba language collapsed words that had the G and B, which is now one sound in the Yoruba language. These words that possess it, these words originally had a vowel in between. And so it is the coalescence or the collapse, the absence of the vowel that now you pronounce it all the same as be. And so in the Chicam is chabeh, to fly up, to fly off. And be, to carry, to bring, bear, move, accomplish, be, abide by, dwell, be lost, perish. And this notion of to fly and to fly off also corresponds as to lift, to carry, saying up in the air, and to be exalted, as we see here. And so this is flushed out in the text to show that these are in fact cognates. And then we have Kabahi, death and die. And then we have be, to perish, to be lost, doomed. And so this dotted H is a suffix, just like it was a prefix in another form. And then kwebayet, breast, nipple. Igbaya, breast. Kweb, to multiply, to increase, to double. Bo, to flourish, grow luxuriantly. Kwebu, or kwaba, or kobawa, a plant. It is agba, a smooth, hard, flat fruit used for medicine. Quib, jar. Igba, calabash. Quibu, woodwork. And then this other form with the dotted H suffix, unknown, used in connection with construction of wood coffins. And then you have sakeb, a type of wood. And then in Yoruba, it's Igbo, forest, wood. Matter of fact, the Igbo people and the Yoruba people are actually, more recent cousins. And they were all, the Yoruba original name is Igbo. They were Igbo people in the proto form before the Igbo and the Yoruba people split. And so Ogbo, a wooden club. And a Sequeb, to be exalted, and then Oshugbo, exalted elders in the Yoruba language. So time and time again, it doesn't fail. With a second, it's the same thing. And so we'll notice that in Shikam and in Yoruba that certain words are missing. And so this is a loan into the Yoruba language, Shebi, but Haseb, to think, to reckon, and Shebi, to think that, to suppose. The prefix H in any H-type sounds is usually missing in the Yoruba language. And the same thing with W in the first consonant position. So if you see an H or H-type sound in the first consonant position and a W in Egyptian, it's going to be zero or missing in the Yoruba language. So hedge, to set forth at dawn. It has a correspondence in Hebrew as Hajj or Arabic Hajj. So when Malcolm X made his Hajj to Mecca, he made his journey. And that's what the word means. But there's a correspondence in Egyptian, hedge, to set forth at dawn. And so another form of the word with a different prefix on the j root is wiji, to send, to depart. And the cognate in Yoruba is ajo, journey. Hedge, to be white, to be bright. Hejet, daylight. In Yoruba is eju, splendor or majesty. Te, sacrilege, transgress. Tehi, to go astray, to transgress. Remember that all H-type sounds are missing. And so this was mainly the point that I was making in this text, or excuse me, in this section of the text, is that the H and the W sounds are usually missing from the first consonant position, but especially H in general. So it is aito, that which is not straight or forward, and another form is eshe, sin, which is cognate with Hebrew hata, to sin. Then you have heru or hero, voice, sound, quorum, and then ariwo in Yoruba, noise. Her, to roar, and then you have oro, bull roar, and then hejet, the so-called white crown. It is in Yoruba, it's ade, crown. Matter of fact, my original Yoruba name is Adegun. And so you see part of that in the name. And so this is a second or a different set of correspondences. So now the G corresponds to the N in Egyptian. Excuse me. The Yoruba G corresponds to Egyptian N in the first consonant position, and the B still corresponds with B in the second consonant position. So we have Neb, Lord, Master, Owner, Husband. In Yoruba, it's Egbe or Ogba, rank. Nu, remember that the B and the M sounds intervocally become W. So Nawo becomes time. And in Yoruba, it's Igba, time. Nabed, goldsmith. In Yoruba, Agbede, goldsmith. Nebet, basket. Agbon, basket. Neb, all. Bogbo, all. So you see these correspondences here. You would look at this and would never guess just by looking at them that they are cognates. But they are cognates and they obey certain sound laws that we have here. And so we see this expressed moreover, so I can show you the N sound, excuse me, the B corresponding to the W. Hold on one second. Hold on. Had to take another sip of my non-alcoholic drink. So I appreciate y'all who are listening, who've been holding on this long. I know this is just, plain, boring information, but it's the necessary, it's the boring work that makes the exciting conclusions where we can argue and bust people over their heads with the information. So as I always say, the demonstration beats conversation. And so in this table that you see here, I'm showing here that there's a systematic way that the words are displayed based on a syllable inverse that is discussed in Aluja Volume 2, and a good model for why this is happening is explained in Jean-Claude Mboli's work, The Origin of African Languages. And it is in that text, what I'm doing here is backing up what Jean-Claude Mboli was saying. And so people don't realize that one of the other reasons why certain words don't look alike when you're comparing them with Egyptian and so-called Niger-Congo and Bantu languages is because the syllables are inverted. And so this happened as a result of, post-classic Negro Egyptian, or Chin Intu as I call it. And all of that is explained in Aluja Volume 2 and Towards a Comparative Dictionary of Chicam and Modern African Languages. But you'll see right here that the syllables are switched. And so the Middle Egyptian and the Yoruba syllables are primarily go together in these correspondence sets versus the Kikongo and the Bassa. So the N in Middle Egyptian corresponds to the G in Yoruba, and the W in Middle Egyptian corresponds to the B in Yoruba in the second consonant position. Now it's the reverse. So what is corresponding to Yoruba B is the first consonant in the root, B in Kikongo, and the G, or just the velar, and whether it's voiced or unvoiced, is in Kikongo in the second consonant position. And the same thing for Bassa. So we have newt, oval. Then we have Mboka, large spherical bead. The M, prefix nominalizing Mboka. So it's actually an N as in Nancy, but in front of a B, it turns into M. So, and then Agbo, a circle. Nawa, I'll say pot. Mbungwa, cup, a mug. Igba, calabash. Agbe, gourd. It's referring to, because they're all related, an oval, a pot, a large spherical bead, a circle, a calabash, a gourd. It's something that has that dip. That's a circle that is used to contain something. And so it's the same thing with bowl and ostrich. Mbangu, basket. Igba, garden egg. So we have the garden egg in the Yoruba that corresponds to the ostrich egg in Middle Egyptian, but it's the Mbangu basket that corresponds to the bowl in Middle Egyptian. So we have a split in the semantics. Then we have Nebet, sky, and Newit, sky. So this, again, proves my point here, that M and B become W intervocally. And so we have two variations of the same word in the Egyptian lexicon. And so this time it's It's reversed in Kikongo, in Gambwila, heavens, and then Imbog, universe. Nawa, celestial waters. That's what they say, but it's really in emptiness. And I'll get into the details. I'll justify this in the upcoming text on the quantum field theory as African heritage text, which is the next book that's coming out. So I'll show how all of this is related. And so in Bonji, the empty circle in Kikongo, and to Li Mbog, and this is the universe, the empty, almost empty. I just didn't have enough room to put the words here without breaking up the table. And Newt, the place, and then Baji, palaver, place, court. Nawa, time, for a while. So we saw time earlier. In Kumbu, time, repetition. Again, the syllables are switched, like here in Ngambwila and Kikongo, but it's the same here in Basa, Mbok, and Bak, time. And then you have this, it's switched again, Koba, god of time. And then Igba, season, Igba, time, in Yoruba language. Nawi, to gather, to collect, to assemble. In Kikongo, Wunga, gather. So now the B has become W here in the Kikongo language. And then Igbado, collectivity. Ba, to rake together, to sweep. And then lastly, you have Middle Egyptian, Geb, earth. And then it's Mbak, earth. And then Igbero Ko, country, district, and Be, live and to dwell. And I explained the anomaly here. And these correspondences are in fact regular. But you know, because the argument is the different dialects that exist in Egyptian. And so, you know, you wouldn't be able to make, and then it gets, these are 4 different languages. 1 Yoruba, which is not a Bantu language, and 2 Bantu languages in Egyptian. But you have these systematic sound meaning correspondences, which are easily explained, you know, via, you know, the comparative method. So we do Egyptian and other languages. So we see the same thing in the Zande language, and in the Somali language. So the word for liver, bere, liver in Zande, and baro, heart, soul. And the word for heart, the word for spirit and soul in these languages derived from a word for heart, liver, stomach. And that's explained in the text. And it's different. There's a different variation, you know, here in Coptic, but Coptic doesn't have the direct one, but we're showing here the difference between the Bere languages and the Behir languages of Chiena Intu. And so that's the focus here. And so Bere, forest, Berit, Bula, bush in Egyptian, Behir, garden, and then Bo, bush in Coptic, Para, egg, Perit, fruit, bead, egg, and then Fre, grain, and or whatnot. And there's this has to be explained because you know, you don't think of fruit and you don't think of egg and grain in the modern sense to correlate with each other. But when we do the systematic analysis of these words and these concepts in these African languages, they all go together. And this is explained, of course, in Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work. So now we have here Lingala, Boko, arm, Bar, you know, arm, and Wuok, arm, and the sounds, you know, correlations are the same. And so what we're showing here is the difference between the consonant, vowel, consonant forms and their cognates in these other languages which have consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. So Zande and Middle Egyptian are Bere languages, and Somali and Coptic are Behir languages. And you can tell by the way that they form their words. That's what you're seeing here, you know, on the side. So Chos in Choi, you know, because of the diphthong, you know, here. And Wuok, they're not they don't have vowels behind it, but we can tell, in Middle Egyptian that there's a vowel behind these words in roots. And so huru, sun, day in the Zande language, heru, day, and also sun in Middle Egyptian, her, heat, the byproduct of the sun, and hau in Coptic. And so, you see these different type of forms, but you would not be able to systematically show the forms of the words if they weren't related. So they automatically think because Somali is a Cushitic language that is related to Middle Egyptian and Coptic, but they wouldn't know the same thing with the Zande languages, and of course Lingala being a Bantu language in this form here. But we've done systematic analyses of these languages and shown. And so I've done the same thing with Proto-Bantu, Middle Egyptian, Sumerian, and Indo-European. And so what matters always is the sound, meaning, correspondences. So y'all over there having genetic conversations in a chat, so I have to visit that later. So matter of fact, let me increase the size here so that is more readily understood. So we have in Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, this aspirated B, bel, light. And then Middle Egyptian, barech, bright, light. Behu, oily, bright, white, bedazzled of sight. Proto-Bantu, bad, shine. And then mudik, to shine. Babar, be white in the Sumerian, which is a partial reduplication. Bala, log, beam. Bettery, wooden pegs. Berber, wooden beam in Middle Egyptian. Proto-Bantu, bondo, baobab tree. Sumerian, bur, a tree. Ber, to carry. Ferry, to carry, to lift, related to ber, arm. And so this is a sound. This is coming from the P sound. And so for those who are familiar, know that the P can come from the BH, the aspirated B sound. So we know what the, and it's proven by this form in Middle Egyptian, that the bell, to flower, to blossom, perech, to unfold, to bloom, to open, to flower. In Proto-Bantu, badu, burst, open, badik, burst, open. And then Sumerian, bar, cut, open, slit. And so when we see this ferry, to carry, to lift, we know that this was originally previously a P, and then that P came from a BH sound. So the Indo-European, helps to clarify the forms that we see in Middle Egyptian. And then these correspondences here, in earlier forms. So they, something happened, down the line, the further we go back. And, these languages help to clarify. And so, Bane, penis, vulva, anus, Bahet, phallus, glands. And then again, Nefer, penis, Bodo, penis, Ngesh, mu, penis. And so you would have to read the text to show how to know. In this correspondence, these I'm showing the Negro Egyptian or Chiana Intu came and formed the Indo-European. And so I'm dealing with the issue of the word for God, for example, and the labials or the bilabial correspondences in the first consonant position test. So this is part of that test. And so we see the same thing, going on here. Let's go down to beru, or bar, barer, to boil, to seethe. Berber, to boil, to boil over. Bid, be cooked, boil. Bala, to boil in water or meat. And then guela, to boil over. This is the inverse to these forms that we see here. And so what I argue ultimately is that all these B sounds, ultimately became from a labial velar, a voice labial velar, which gives us the B, and then in Indo-European, in an earlier form, became aspirated. And so it just became B in the Proto-Bantu and the Sumerian, but it was aspirated in some forms in the Egyptian and in the Indo-European. But this is the reverse. Rebek, to burn, to cook. Refer, to boil, to cook. Refiyet, warm, heat. Again, if we see a B and we see an F, we know that there was a P somewhere, and that the proto-form, the B, was aspirated. And so in in Proto-Bantu, it's damba, to cook, and dug, to cook. And so that B, again, of course, as I can demonstrate, comes from a G sound and a labialized G, which the labialized G was lost in this Proto-Bantu form. And so we have shega, to cook, to dry, same thing here. And so, there's more that has to be said about that. And then I think I already did Proto-Bantu, Sumerian, and Chikan, but these are just some more of the correspondences. And I think I did these. I'm not sure, but if I didn't, here they are. No, I didn't do these in particular, but these are just more. And I can go on and on. It doesn't matter. This is, again, Chikam and Chiluba. So I'm showing in this variation here that even in, the Chiluba forms are going to match different forms in Egyptian, because there were different languages and different Egyptian dialects that had these different sound correspondences. So, when we see these things like what you're seeing here, I don't know how clear it is for you guys, watching it. But, let's take just the first 3 rows, for example. I'll do the first 4 rows. So fabric and fabric mummy binding, sail and curtain for the sail. And there's no dialect B, but in Chiluba, Chikuminu, weavers, craft, and textile. Ter, some people say ta, but it's not ta, it's ter, like in territory for land. Stuff, substance. And in dialect 2, kimu, or kimiwa, mineral, a substance. In Chiluba, chi ikadidi, substance, what remains of itself. Tarahi, to stomp down. Sakimkim, destruction, annihilation. Kuma in Chiluba, kuma, beat down, to knock, thunder, think of rain. Ter, sacrificial animal. Kimi, a bull. And in Chiluba and Gombe, cow, beef, livestock. And so sacrificial animals for Africans and people in the Middle East are cows, bulls, sheep, goats. Those usually take the gamut. And so you never really see people doing alligator or some kind of chicken, ducks. Those are sacrificial animals. And so this is, in Egyptian, is kind of doing all, but these sacrificial animals, saying would be the beef and livestock that you see in these other forms. So teramu, and then tertamim, snake. And so, as I discussed in the text and showed, that a snake and a worm is the same in African languages. And so we have kimi, snake, a black desert cobra, and chikusu, meat, worm, achmeric larva. And so this looks like it doesn't correspond, but looks are deceiving. And I already showed in the text where the S also corresponds to M, and the R, in the nasalized volar trill systematically, in the text. So, which is why it's included in this different table, because I've already established this as a cognate. And then, and then on and on we can go. It's the same thing. And so all of these are, I did different tables to show that these second consonants all correspond with these in a systematic way, and they do. And so, of course, all of these are in Aluja Volume 2, which is on sale now if you go to my site at asarimhotep. And I can go on and on. If y'all want me to go on, I'll go on. But it's the same thing. So it's Sumerian and Egyptian, the R and R correspondences. Let me see. I don't even know how many I got left. There's more Yoruba, more Egyptian, Sumerian. I'm just willing to go, all the way, with it. Here's some more Indo-European, Middle Egyptian, and Chiluba Bantu. And then I'll just do this one. So this one, I'll end here. And this is for Baba Heru. If you're still listening, Baba Heru, this is what I was talking about at the end of the, as far as the so-called feminine T. And so what I want to show you, Baba Heru, is that in both Egyptian, and this is the collagen language. The collagen is the so-called Nilo-Saharan language, another language that is supposed to not be related to Afro-Asiatic and thus ancient Egyptian. But here we see the corresponding sound meaning correspondences and the same grammatical suffix with the same function in both Egyptian and collagen. And so this deals with the final T in both the languages. So you have this word here, ser, sheep. And then you have collagen, kacher, sheep. Then you have seriyit, a particular kind of sheep. And we're talking about a secondary noun. So this T doesn't make the sheep feminine. All that it does is it brings about a secondary noun. So you have kachiriyit, a sheep. And so we have hawa, large, the adjective. And then hawit, largeness, the noun. And so it nominalizes, this T nominalizes verbs and adjectives. So it serves, two functions, at least in these examples, because it serves more. There's also the abstract T, but which I guess would be related in this sense. So you have the suffix T that brings about secondary meanings and specific meanings for certain nouns. And if it is an adjective, if the root is an adjective or a verb, it nominalizes it. So we have here how large, hawit, largeness. Then we have the cognate and the collagen, o, and wo, large. And so this ha sound is dropped in collagen. So it's just the W or, O sound. So o or wo, large. And then you have onto and ondo. And so this is an infix. It's just to block so you have a good transition. You have a block, and so it's indo, largeness. Bin, bad, evil. Bunyun, enemy. Minet, evil. Bunyut, and the enemy. Boon, witching. Bundit, and the evil or the witchcraft. Ham, eat. Eat. Amit, food. So you have the verb eat, and then the T suffix makes this food. And so the same thing in collagen. Eat. Amit, food. Dit, the food. Mesyit, evening meal. Misyit, any meal. Both derived from eat root. So min, be ill. Minet, sickness, disease, wound. So this T is the abstract nominalizer suffix. And then mian, be ill. Mian, eat, state of being sick. Mian to, mian do, sickness, disease, illness. So I hope this is making sense, Baba Heru, if you are listening. So you can see between these two languages, the Nilo-Saharan language, not only are the words matching, but in regularly, the same grammatical function exists with the same, verbal suffix. Excuse me, not verbal suffix, morphological suffix. And so we see the same, thing happen between Bantu and Egyptian. So we have these terms here, Mehmet, an edible plant and its fruit. I have in red what we're corresponding here. So we have the T suffix, which becomes chi in prefix in Chiluba. So chimuma, fruit, orange, fetus. Mawut, mother. Chimamu, Chimawu, my mother, mom, maternal aunt. Pipet, a plant. Chipupu, foliage. Minminet, a herd, cattle. Chimuna, domestic animal. Minyit, root. Chimini, what grows, seed, plant. Jeriet, wall, floor. Even though these aren't cognate, Chibua, wall, dirt road, clay floor. They still, to make the words in both the languages, they still use the same grammatical feature. So when the person says that they have different grammar and morphology and different vocabulary, the person at the beginning of our conversation didn't know what the heck they were talking about. So we're going to go all the way back 62 slides, to the beginning. And we're going to reread what the person said. And then I want y'all to, reflect on what the person said and then what we were able to demonstrate here today. So the anonymous person said that Niger-Congo is a completely separate family of languages. And Egyptian is Afro-Asiatic, and there are major grammatical differences in case, gender, and number. Bantu languages, for example, lack grammatical gender, in which we also read that topology does not establish genetic relationships. So this was a ill-informed, attempt at trying to diminish the correspondences or the relationship between Egyptian and so-called Niger-Congo languages. You have the masculine and the feminine forms of many words in ancient Egyptian. While ancient Egyptian is not a Semitic language, it does share some features of grammar in common with ancient Phoenician, Hebrew, and Arabic. Coptic is the final stage of Egyptian that we know of and is technically a dead language, but I've studied some Buharic and Sahidic myself, which are dialects of Coptic, so I know what I'm talking about. No, you don't. But even if we just compare vocabulary, Niger-Congo vocabulary is vastly different from ancient Egyptian vocabulary. And I have a hieroglyphic lexicon to prove it. Having a hieroglyphic lexicon, I have many hieroglyphic lexicons. And I go through all of those hieroglyphic lexicons and I prove everything that you just said wrong. And I dare anybody, bring your teachers, bring your PhD linguist to have this conversation, and we can get more in depth. And I guarantee you the outcome is not going to be what you think. And so demonstration beats conversation. And, we got to stop this silliness about, trying to discredit and trying to stop arguments before they are made, before you can even examine them. Trying to, let me stop the screen share. There we go. Trying to discredit, information that they have not themselves been able to examine or show their own work. So, with that said, I think it's almost 3 hours now. Thought Evoker says, I challenge that you didn't connect English stag, aka male deer, in the Proto-Bantu Sumer sag deer connection. He's just kidding. Profound lecture. Asar. Appreciate it. And this is his statement. Even though I didn't use the word stag. And so I'm trying to see and go up and see what the commentary is. And so I didn't mean it to go a full 3 hours right now, but that's what it has. And it would have went longer because I had more slides as you show, but I just wanted to exhaust it so that, those of you understand, like, this is some very detailed work. And again, the key thing here is that when languages are genetically related, unless they're like immediate, closely related, the forms of the words and the morphology and things of that nature is not going to look alike. It's going to look different. That's because of sound change. And that's why we do the comparative method. And so the comparative method allows us to line up and establish what are true cognates or not, and try to eliminate the loan words and things of that nature until we get to a point where we can explain and everything corresponds in terms of the sounds of the language. And then we reconstruct the proto-language in terms of the proto-morphemes and the proto-phonology. And then from the proto-phonology, then we could start making logical arguments. The kind of, if P, therefore Q, for example, in terms of the sound change. And so that is in the mathematics and discrete mathematics, and which we don't have time for here. And so, so I appreciate everyone for listening, and I'll just have to go back and see what y'all were arguing about in the comment section. But as always, for those who want to argue and say that the stuff that Egyptian is not related to, for example, Bantu and Yoruba or whatnot, I challenge any one of them to any public debate anywhere. And we can hash this out and show for a fact that they don't know what they're talking about. And so what I just showed is why we abandon the Afro-Asiatic, Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, and Khorasan labels, because those models are not sufficient enough to explain the correspondences that we see between languages like Egyptian and Yoruba and Egyptian and the Bantu languages, for example, in Collagen, which is supposed to be Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Congo and unrelated, but we're showing better relations between them than y'all are between Afro-Asiatic, because again, Africanists don't utilize the comparative method when formulating their language families and then the higher language phylums. And because they don't do that, they can never show the kinds of correspondences that we're able to show here today. And so, with that said, I appreciate you all. And again, I encourage you all to join the patreon.com/asarimhotep page. If you want to see in visual form the connections between ancient Egyptian and West and Central Africa, please support this film. And so it's going to be a number of years. And so you'll hear me throughout the years, asking for your support and doing fundraisers on my own so that we can get the funds and complete this film. And so, I want it to be a good, dynamic, non like it's visually appealing, everything, so that, and of course that the information is solid, so that these kind of connections are made and understood and it's clear, so that we can accurately tell the history and the connections and the migrations and the interactions between African people in the tradition of Diop, Theophilo Benga, and others who came before them. So with that said, here are my contact information. And so y'all have a blessed night. Stay safe. And, if y'all have any questions, put them in the comments. Please share the video and, hit me up at one of these public social media platforms, and, or directly on my website at asarimhotep.com. And I'll try my best to answer them, in a timely fashion. So y'all be safe. God bless. Good night.